Just one example, John, of how difficult some of these clawbacks can be. In this one,
the black owner of 14 McDonald's franchises is accusing the fast food company of racial discrimination.
Hold it, David. The judge has got a right to his opinion, so have hundreds of millions of other people.
In Albuquerque, New Mexico, an elderly woman was severely burned when she spilled a cup of McDonald's coffee in her lap.
An 81-year-old woman has...
The day that the burns happened, my mother and my nephew went through the drive-thru.
Number 4, $5 million fall. In October of 2010, Beverly Munguia of Texas slipped and fell while patronizing a McDonald's restaurant on the island of Maui. She suffered a severe spinal injury that left her confined to a wheelchair most of the time. The incident resulted in a lawsuit that delivered the largest financial remuneration in a slip-and-fall case in Hawaii's history. The case, Mungia versus Gelwin of Maui LLC, was filed in a federal court due to the fact that the plaintiff is a resident of Texas.
That's right, McDonald's just in the last 2 hours. Steve Easterbrook returning equity awards and cash. He's agreed to leave the system. McDonald's has purchased his 13 locations for $33.5 million.
The injury she sustained required the placement of metal rods and pins in her back that likely resulted in a subsequent injury to another part of her spine. She was left with a spinal deformity that resulted in her being forced to walk with a pronounced stoop and severely limited mobility.
Just one example, John, of how difficult some of these clawbacks can be. In this one, announcing a settlement with Herb Washington, Washington was the company's largest black franchisee at one point.
During the trial, Dr. Rodney Isom, a rehabilitation specialist, testified that Mrs. Munguia would be permanently disabled from work, resulting in lost wages of nearly $500,000. The plaintiffs also submitted evidence that Mrs. Munguia would suffer chronic pain and require daily assistance for her basic living needs. Further evidence was submitted that the cost of a life care plan for Mrs. Munguia was $2.1 million. Dr. Rober Mail, an economic damages expert, testified that Mrs. Munguia would suffer total economic damages of $2,654,100. The extreme physical and emotional damages suffered by Mrs. Munguia because of the fall played a significant role in the verdict rendered by the jury.
Kate, McDonald's announced another settlement today. What can you tell us about that one?
In the end, the U.S. District Court jury awarded Munguia $2.67 million in special damages for past and future medical expenses, lost wages, and retirement benefits. The jury also awarded her $3 million in general damages for pain, suffering, and loss of enjoyment of life.
And these are just two that we mentioned. There was another one last week with Daryl and James Bird out of...
Is it unusual to get a couple of settlements like that at once? It seems like it might be.
Number 3, $33.5 million discrimination lawsuit. Former MLB player and longtime McDonald's franchise owner-operator Herbert Washington settled a major case with McDonald's. Washington's suit alleged that the company had relegated him to owning locations in lower-income, predominantly black neighborhoods, thereby curtailing his chances for profits, while white franchises were given more profitable locations.
The black owner of 14 McDonald's franchises is accusing the fast food company of racial discrimination. What initially attracted you to the Golden Arches, and did something change? Herbert, you were a major McDonald's franchise owner.
A McDonald's operator since 1980, Washington had decades of experience in forming his suit and had raised allegations of racist behavior many times before, which he believed was an effort to drive him out of business. Washington also claimed that McDonald's denied him opportunities for growth and expansion that were offered to white franchisees. He alleged that the company forced him to sell his stores at a lower price than they were worth, and that it refused to approve the sale of his stores to a qualified black buyer. McDonald's denied the allegations of racial discrimination and argued that Washington's struggles were due to his poor business decisions.
We're directed and relegated to the inner cities, where the cost of doing business, therefore you don't have those pass-through dollars that my white counterpart.
The company said that it provided him with support and resources to help him succeed. Washington settled for a $33.5 million purchase of his 13 stores, though the chain still admitted no wrongdoing as part of the settlement. Yet, the $33.5 million price tag meant that this was one of the largest lawsuit verdicts of its kind at the time.
The McDonald's system and those arches are iconic. In the late 60s, that African Americans had boycotted McDonald's.
Was there actually something that changed, or did you become more aware of what you're describing as these hardships?
Number 2, McLibel. In 1990, McDonald's was accused of mistreating workers and contributing to environmental damage by London Greenpeace, an activist group. The group distributed a leaflet titled "What's Wrong with McDonald's?" which contained the accusations against the fast food chain. The leaflet also called on people to boycott the company.
Campaigners are performing a public service.
McDonald's responded by suing 5 members of London Greenpeace, including Helen Steele and David Morris, for libel. Steele and Morris, who had no involvement in the production or distribution of the leaflet, were chosen as the public faces of the case. The trial began in 1994 and lasted for more than 2.5 years, becoming the longest trial in English history. McDonald's spent millions of pounds on legal fees and hired 20 top lawyers to argue their case. Steele and Morris, who could not afford to pay for their own lawyers, represented themselves.
The judge has got a right to his opinion, so have hundreds of millions of other people. We're going to the LSC from Bristol.
The 2.5-year trial ended with a win for McDonald's, which opposed claims made by Steele and Morris, including that it destroyed forested lands, caused starvation in developing countries, and exploited kids in advertising. But though McDee's won, it was awarded only around $47,500, which it never collected, and the whole trial was a PR disaster for the restaurant.
We're calling on the public to judge for themselves. The campaign is unstoppable and it will continue to grow.
Number 1, $2 million coffee spill. The Liebeck versus McDonald's restaurant case, also known as the McDonald's hot coffee case, is one of the most well-known product liability lawsuits ever. It was filed by Stella Liebeck against McDonald's in 1992. The incident that led to the lawsuit occurred on February 27, 1992, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Stella Liebeck, a 79-year-old woman, was a passenger in her grandson's car and ordered a cup of coffee at the drive-thru of a McDonald's restaurant. After their order was completed, her grandson pulled the car forward out of the drive-thru lane and stopped again to allow Stella to add cream and sugar to her coffee.
Been awarded $2.9 million after she sued McDonald's, claiming their coffee was too hot.
Spilled a cup of McDonald's coffee in her lap.
An 81-year-old woman has...
In Albuquerque, New Mexico, an elderly woman was severely burned when she...
Stella placed the coffee between her knees so she could use both hands to open the lid and add her sugar. While removing the lid, the cup tipped over and poured the entire cup of 190-degree coffee all over her sweatpants, which absorbed the hot liquid and held it against her skin. This caused severe burns on her thighs, buttocks, and genital area. Liebeck was taken to the hospital, where she underwent extensive treatment. She spent 8 days in the hospital and underwent 2 years of medical treatment. Her medical expenses amounted to $11,000, and she asked McDonald's to cover her medical expenses, which McDonald's refused to do. As a result, Liebeck filed a lawsuit against McDonald's, claiming that the coffee was unreasonably hot and that McDonald's had failed to warn her of the dangers of its coffee. Her lawsuit claimed that the coffee was heated to a temperature of 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, which was too hot for human consumption, and that McDonald's had received numerous complaints about the temperature of its coffee in the past.
I was not in it for the money. I was in it because I wanted to bring the temperature down.
That was dangerous and it was burning.
A really strong reason for why they...
I thought, oh, I hope he's counting digits on the verdict. I remember I could see Judge Scott going like this with his pencil, and
During the trial, the plaintiff's lawyers presented evidence that showed that the temperature of the coffee was much higher than what was considered safe for consumption. They argued that McDonald's was aware of the danger of serving coffee at such high temperatures, but continued to do so for economic reasons, as it enabled them to save on the cost of coffee beans. McDonald's, on the other hand, argued that the coffee was not unreasonably hot and that the temperature was industry standard. They also claimed that Liebeck was at fault for spilling the coffee on herself and that she had contributed to her injuries by not taking adequate care while handling the coffee. The jury ultimately sided with Liebeck and awarded her $200,000 in compensatory damages, which later was reduced to $160,000, and $2.7 million in punitive damages, which was later reduced to $480,000. The verdict generated widespread media attention, with many people criticizing Liebeck for filing a frivolous lawsuit and for seeking to profit from her injuries. However, the facts of the case paint a different picture. The temperature of the coffee was much higher than what was considered safe for consumption, and Liebeck's injuries were severe and required extensive medical treatment. The jury's decision to award punitive damages was based on the evidence presented at trial, which showed that McDonald's had a long history of serving dangerously hot coffee and had received numerous complaints from customers about burn injuries caused by their coffee. The ultimate problem was the fact that McDonald's didn't just serve their coffee hot. Their operations manual required that it be served between 180 and 190 degrees.
Into the sweatsuit that she was wearing and pooled in.
Not realizing I was burned that bad, I knew I was in terrible pain. All I remember is trying to get out of the car. I screamed.
30 to 40 degrees hotter than other coffee-serving restaurants in the area. The Shriners Burn Institute in Cincinnati issued warnings that coffee served above 130 degrees was dangerously hot. McDonald's knew that their coffee was not fit for consumption at the temperature it was served because it caused third-degree burns within 3 to 7 seconds of contact with the skin. In the 10 years prior to this accident, they had 700 complaints of burns from their coffee, including complaints of burns to children and infants from accidental spills. Stella's case highlighted the importance of product liability law and the role it plays in protecting consumers from dangerous products. In the aftermath of the case, McDonald's changed its policy and began serving coffee at a lower temperature, and warning labels were added to their coffee cups, cautioning customers about the hot temperature of the coffee. The Liebeck versus McDonald's restaurants case was a landmark case in the history of product liability law because it showed the public that they can indeed hold big companies accountable for their actions.
I think it's absurd.
The most widely misunderstood story in America.
The day that the burns happened, my mother and my nephew went through the drive-thru, and in the Ford Probe, there's slanted surfaces everywhere. There's no place to put the coffee.
That's all for today, folks. See you next time.